Dead weight? Dead weight? That's what my boss called me after 7 years of sacrificing everything for his company. 7 years of missed birthdays, canceled vacations, and 3 a.m. emergency fixes. And in one moment, he destroyed it all, calling me worthless in front of the entire team. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted at work? Oh, I forgot to tell my name, I'm Jenny. And this story of how I took their backup server and sold it to their biggest competitor is one you won't believe. Let me start with the first point, the devastating betrayal that pushed me over the edge. It was just another Tuesday at Pinnacle Tech Solutions. I'd been with the company since they were nothing, literally working out of a converted garage, with mismatched furniture and a coffee machine that broke down every other day. Back then, there were just 12 of us, dreaming big and working ridiculous hours to make those dreams happen. Robert, the founder and my boss, used to bring us all pizza at midnight when we were pulling all-nighters to meet deadlines. "We're family," he'd say, "and families stick together." Family. That word echoes in my mind now with a bitter irony I can barely describe. Over 7 years, I watched that little startup grow into something impressive. 200 employees, fancy downtown offices with floor-to-ceiling windows, and clients whose names you'd definitely recognize. And through it all, I was there, the backbone of their server infrastructure. I knew every line of code, every patch, every workaround. Those servers were practically my children. I'd built them, nurtured them, protected them. When something went wrong at 3 a.m., and something always went wrong at 3 a.m., I was the one who got the call. Not Robert. Not the shiny MBA graduates he started hiring once we got respectable. Me. The night before everything fell apart, I was at the office until dawn. A critical server had developed issues that threatened to take down our biggest client's entire operation. While everyone else went home to their families and their lives, I stayed, alone. Fueled by vending machine snacks and energy drinks, I dug through thousands of lines of code until I found the problem, a tiny error that could have cost the company millions if it had gone unfixed. By the time I finally solved it, the sun was rising, casting long shadows across the empty office. I should have gone home to shower and sleep. That's what a reasonable person would have done. But we had an important client meeting that morning, a potential new contract that would be huge for the company. So I splashed water on my face, changed into the spare clothes I kept in my desk drawer, because this wasn't the first all-nighter, not by a long shot, and made myself presentable. I even stopped to buy coffee for the team on my way to the meeting room. A small tradition I'd maintained for years, my little way of saying, "We're in this together." The barista at the coffee shop knew my order by heart. "The usual team spread, Jenny?" 7 years of loyalty, condensed into a cardboard carrier, with 6 carefully labeled cups. When I walked into the conference room, something felt immediately wrong. Robert was huddled in the corner with Derek, this new hotshot he'd hired about 3 months ago, supposedly to expand our server team. Derek was young, fresh out of some elite tech program, with perfectly styled hair and shoes that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He'd been shadowing me for weeks, asking questions, taking notes on everything I showed him. I'd been patient, generous with my knowledge after all. I remembered being the new person once. As soon as I entered, their conversation stopped abruptly. The silence felt heavy, significant. I set down the coffee carrier and my laptop, forcing a smile despite my exhaustion. "Morning," I said. "Coffee's still hot." Robert nodded but didn't meet my eyes. Another bad sign. The others arrived shortly after. Amy from security, Raj from development, and a few others. Everyone took their coffee with murmured thanks, but the atmosphere remained strained. I opened my laptop, pulled up my presentation on the server fixes, ready to brief everyone before the client arrived. That's when Robert cleared his throat and said the words that would change everything. "Before we get started, I have an announcement to make." Something in his tone made my stomach drop. I'd heard that tone before, when he'd laid off half the original team after our first round of serious funding. "This is just business" tone. "We're restructuring the server management team," he continued, still not quite looking at me. "Derek will be taking over as team lead, effective immediately." The room went completely silent. I felt everyone's eyes on Misam, curious, some pitying, none willing to speak up. The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "I'm sorry, what?" My voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Robert finally looked at me, his expression a carefully constructed mask of professional regret. "Jenny, the company is evolving. We need fresh perspectives, innovative approaches. Derek has experience with the newer systems we're planning to implement." "Experience?" I couldn't help the disbelieving laugh that escaped me. "He's been here 3 months. I built these systems from nothing." "That's exactly the problem," Robert said, his voice hardening slightly. "You're too attached to legacy systems. We need to move forward." Legacy systems. As if my life's work was some outdated relic. As if I hadn't been constantly learning, adapting, improving our infrastructure, year after year. As if I hadn't just spent the entire night saving the company from disaster, using my supposedly outdated knowledge. "So you're demoting me?" I asked, my face burning with humiliation, as everyone watched this unfold. "Just like that? After 7 years?" Derek had the decency to look uncomfortable, staring down at his tablet, like it contained the secrets of the universe. Robert sighed, that condescending sigh that made me feel like a difficult child rather than a valued employee. "Look, you'll still be part of the team. You'll report to Derek, help with the transition. Your institutional knowledge is valuable." Institutional knowledge. The corporate way of saying old and outdated but still somewhat useful until we can fully replace you. 7 years reduced to institutional knowledge. That's when I asked the question. I shouldn't have asked the question, whose answer would shatter whatever illusions I still had about my place in this company. "Was this always the plan when you hired him?" The slight hesitation before Robert answered told me everything. "We've been planning this transition for a while. The company needs to evolve. So I've just been training my replacement? For 3 months. I've been showing him everything I know. And you never thought to mention this to me?" The conference room was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning hum. Robert glanced at his watch. He was worried about the client meeting, not about the fact that he'd just demolished my world. "Jenny, don't make this personal. It's business. The truth is, the company has outgrown certain positions. We need innovation, not maintenance. Maintenance, like I was a janitor mopping floors rather than the person who had architected their entire technological infrastructure. The person who had just saved them from catastrophic failure mere hours ago. So I'm what? Dead weight now?" My voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion I was desperately trying to contain. And that's when he said it, the words that would change both our lives forever. Robert looked annoyed, glancing at the others in the room who were witnessing this uncomfortable exchange. His professional mask slipped, just for a moment, revealing the truth beneath. "If you want to put it bluntly, yes. The company can't carry dead weight if we want to stay competitive. You can either adapt to your new role or—" He let the alternative hang in the air. The message was clear. Adapt or leave. 7 years of loyalty, of missed family events, of solving problems no one else could solve, and I was dead weight. The client meeting was starting in 15 minutes. Robert stood up, straightening his expensive tie. I remembered giving him as a gift after we landed our first major client. We'll continue this discussion later. For now, let's focus on keeping the client happy. As everyone filed out, Derek tried to catch my eye, maybe to offer some awkward consolation, but I couldn't look at him. I just sat there, staring at my laptop screen as it dimmed to save power, just like my role at the company had been dimmed, reduced, minimized. I don't remember much about the client meeting. I sat there, nodding at appropriate times, answering technical questions on autopilot when they came my way. Inside, something had shifted. I felt hollow, but also strangely calm, the kind of calm that comes when something inside you breaks so completely that there's no more room for panic. After the meeting, I went back to my desk. The office continued its normal buzz around me. People chatting, phones ringing, keyboards clicking. Nobody knew that my world had just imploded. Or maybe they did know. Maybe everyone had known about the restructuring, except me. I opened my drawer and found the emergency server keys. As the original infrastructure architect, I was one of the few people with physical access to our most critical systems, including the backup server. It was housed in a separate, secure room of precaution I had insisted on years ago. That backup server contained everything: client data, proprietary software, development history, everything that made Pinnacle Tech Solutions valuable. I held the keys in my hand, feeling their weight. 7 years of loyalty, of putting the company first, of being the reliable one who would drop everything to fix a crisis, and in return, I was dead weight. Something that needed to be cut away for the company to thrive. That's when the idea first formed. It wasn't even fully conscious at first, more like a whisper in the back of my mind. What if I showed them exactly what dead weight could do? What if I showed them what happens when you discard someone who knows all your secrets, all your vulnerabilities? I knew Technova, Pinnacle's biggest competitor, had been trying to poach our clients for years. I also knew they'd pay handsomely for what was on that backup server. It wouldn't just be corporate espionage, it would be a complete transfer of power. Pinnacle would be crippled, possibly beyond recovery. The thought should have horrified me. Instead, it filled that hollow space inside me with something new: purpose, revenge, justice, even, in a twisted way. I put the keys back in my drawer and closed it. Not yet. I needed to think, to plan. This wasn't a decision to make in the heat of emotion. But as I worked through the rest of that day, pretending everything was normal, the idea grew stronger. Robert had made his choice. He'd decided I was dispensable. A relic. Dead weight. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Robert's voice. Dead weight. Dead weight. The phrase played on loop in my mind, each repetition stoking my anger, my hurt, my sense of betrayal. By morning, my decision was made. I arrived at the office early 6 a.m., before anyone else would be there. The security guard nodded at me sleepily. He was used to my odd hours. Server emergency, I explained with a tired smile. He waved me through without question. Why would he question me? I was Jenny, the reliable one, the backbone of the company's infrastructure. At least, that's who I had been until yesterday. The backup server room required 2 forms of authentication: the physical key and a biometric scan. My fingerprints were still in the system. They hadn't thought to remove those yet. Inside, the server hummed quietly, blinking lights reflecting off the sterile white walls. This machine contained everything. Literally everything that made Pinnacle valuable. Client lists, proprietary algorithms, financial data, future product plans. It was the company's heart, its brain, its soul, and I was about to rip it out. The server itself wasn't large, about the size of a microwave oven, heavy but manageable. I disconnected it carefully, reverently almost. Despite everything, I still respected the technology, the work that had gone into building all this, my work. I had brought a rolling suitcase, the kind with a hard shell that business travelers use. The server fit perfectly. I reconnected the empty server rack to prevent immediate alarms, closed everything up, and rolled the suitcase out. The security guard barely looked up as I left, mentioning something about an early breakfast meeting. In my car, with the server secured in my trunk, I felt strangely calm. This wasn't impulsive anymore. This was a calculated decision. If I was dead weight, then I was taking the weight of their entire operation with me. I knew who to call at Technova. Sandra, their head of development, had tried to recruit me multiple times over the years. I had always declined out of loyalty to Pinnacle. Loyalty. The word tasted like ash in my mouth now. The call was brief. I didn't explain much, just said I had something they would want to see. She agreed to meet me that morning. As I drove to the meeting point, a quiet coffee shop far from both companies' offices, I tried not to think about what I was doing, about the legal implications, about how this would affect my future in the industry, about how many people at Pinnacle, people who had never called me dead weight, might lose their jobs when the company inevitably collapsed without its data. But then Robert's voice would echo in my head again. Dead weight. Dead weight. And my resolve would harden once more. Sandra was already waiting when I arrived, sipping a latte and checking her phone. She looked up as I approached, her eyes widening slightly as she recognized me. I sat down across from her, the suitcase by my side. "Jenny," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "Things change," I replied. "Loyalties change. What exactly do you have for me?" I patted the suitcase. "Everything. Pinnacle's entire backup server. Client data, source code, financial records, future product plans. Everything." She stared at me, her expression shifting from skepticism to shock to calculation in rapid succession. If that's true, that would be. Why would you do this?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Why was I doing this? For revenge? For money? Because I had nowhere else to turn? All of the above? "Let's just say Pinnacle and I have irreconcilable differences," I finally said. "I'm offering you a competitive advantage, unlike anything you could imagine. Are you interested or not?" Sandra leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "What are you asking for in return?" I named a figure high enough to ensure I wouldn't need to work for a while, low enough to make the deal irresistible. Sandra didn't even blink. She knew what this was worth. "And a job," I added. "Not right away, after the dust settles. I want to be valued for what I know, not treated as obsolete." Sandra nodded slowly. "We can arrange that. But, Jenny, you understand there's no going back from this, right? This is corporate espionage. This is serious." I met her gaze steadily. "I understand exactly what this is. Do we have a deal?" She extended her hand across the table. "We have a deal." And just like that, I betrayed 7 years of loyalty. I handed over the keys to the kingdom. I transformed from trusted employee to corporate saboteur. The money was in my account by that afternoon. I didn't go back to Pinnacle. I texted HR that I was taking a sick day. By the next morning, all hell had broken loose. I watched it unfold from the safety of my apartment, through frantic emails and text messages from former colleagues. Systems are down. Can't access the backup. Where are you? Robert is losing his mind. I didn't respond to any of them. I just watched, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and horror at what I had done. The weight of my actions was starting to sink in, but so was the realization of my power. I wasn't dead weight. I was the linchpin that had held everything together, and now they knew it too far too late. That afternoon, my phone rang. Robert. I let it go to voicemail. His message was exactly what I expected, frantic, then angry, then pleading. He knew. Somehow, he had figured out what I had done. He threatened legal action, jail time, ruination. I listened to his threats with a strange detachment. The Jenny who had feared losing her job, who had desperately sought approval, who had sacrificed everything for the company that Jenny was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who had taken control of her own fate, for better or worse. The next day, Technova announced a revolutionary new product line that looked suspiciously similar to Pinnacle's secret development plans. Within a week, Pinnacle's stock had plummeted. Within a month, they had laid off half their staff. Within 3 months, they filed for bankruptcy. And me? I was free. Wealthy enough to take my time figuring out my next move. Notorious enough in certain industry circles to never work in tech again. At least not officially. And oddly, at peace with my decision, despite everything it had cost. Because when someone calls you dead weight after 7 years of dedication, sometimes the only response is to show them exactly how much you've been carrying all along. Once I made the decision to take Pinnacle's backup server, I knew I had to be methodical. This wasn't just about grabbing equipment. This was about executing the perfect heist against people who thought they were smarter than me. Here's what most people don't understand about corporate security. It's built to keep outsiders out, not insiders in. And I wasn't just any insider. I was the person who had designed most of their security protocols in the first place. The morning after being called dead weight, I arrived at 5:45 a.m. I chose Wednesday deliberately. It was the day our night security guard, Mike, always worked a double shift. Poor guy would be fighting to stay awake by the early morning hours. As expected, he was half asleep when I badged in. "Server emergency again, Jenny?" He yawned. I gave him my most exhausted smile. When isn't there one these days? Robert wants everything perfect for the investor meeting tomorrow. Mike nodded sympathetically. He'd seen me come in at odd hours for years. This was nothing unusual. That's the thing about establishing patterns. When you finally break them, nobody notices. The backup server room was in the basement, behind 3 separate security measures: a keycard, a physical key, and biometric verification. As head of server infrastructure, former head, now I had access to all 3. They hadn't revoked anything yet. Classic Robert, making a major personnel change without thinking through the security implications. The server room hummed with the sound of machinery when I entered. Rows of blinking lights, the steady whir of cooling fans. I'd spent more time in this room than in my own apartment over the years. It was almost sad, in a way. Almost. The main backup server, the crown jewel, was kept in a separate, climate-controlled cabinet at the back. It contained everything: client information, proprietary algorithms, financial records, emails, development plans for the next 3 years. Literally everything that made Pinnacle valuable was backed up on this machine. I opened the cabinet carefully, disconnected the server, and slid it into the rolling hardshell suitcase I'd brought. The whole process took less than 10 minutes. I reconnected the empty rack so no immediate alerts would trigger and closed everything up. On my way out, I stopped by my desk to collect a few personal items. Nothing suspicious. Just a photo frame, my favorite coffee mug, a sweater I kept for when the office got too cold. Anyone watching the security cameras would see a dedicated employee coming in early, dealing with a server issue, and grabbing a few things before leaving. Nothing to raise alarms. All fixed? Mike asked as I rolled my suitcase toward the exit. For now, I replied, but I'm grabbing breakfast before the real chaos starts. He waved me through, and just like that, I walked out with Pinnacle's entire digital legacy rolling behind me like a carry-on suitcase. Now came the tricky part, finding a buyer who would pay what this was worth. I'd mentioned Technova earlier. They were the obvious choice, Pinnacle's biggest competitor. But I needed leverage to ensure they didn't just take the server and then report me to the authorities. I drove to a storage facility I'd rented that morning, secured the server, and then went to a coffee shop with free Wi-Fi. Using a new email address created through a VPN, I reached out to 3 key people at Technova: their CTO, their head of product development, and their CEO. The email was simple. I have something that will change the competitive landscape in your favor. 1 meeting, no commitment required. Within an hour, I had responses from all 3. The meeting was set for noon at a private dining room in an upscale restaurant. Corporate espionage happens over expensive wine, apparently. I arrived early, watching them file in. Marcus Chen, the CTO, Eliza Warren, head of product, and Vincent Torres, the CEO. They looked exactly like their LinkedIn photos, polished, confident, skeptical. Thank you for meeting me, I said once we were seated. I'll get straight to the point. I have Pinnacle's entire backup server, everything from client lists to the source code for their upcoming product line. Their expressions shifted from skepticism to disbelief to calculated interest. That's a serious claim, Vincent said carefully, and potentially illegal. I smiled. Absolutely, which is why I've taken precautions. The server isn't here, of course, and evidence of this meeting and copies of select files have been secured with instructions for release if anything happens to me. Classic Deadman's switch. I was bluffing, but they couldn't know that. Marcus leaned forward. Why come to us? Why not just leak everything publicly if you want to hurt Pinnacle? Because I want compensation for 7 years of undervalued work, I replied honestly. And because a targeted strike is more effective than a public one, you can use this information strategically. Random hackers on the internet would just create chaos. What are you asking for? Eliza cut to the chase. I named my price, $850,000, less than they'd pay for conventional corporate espionage, more than enough for me to disappear for a while. And a consulting contract, I added. Not right away. 6 months from now, once this has blown over. I know their systems better than anyone. That knowledge is valuable. They exchanged glances. Vincent nodded slightly. We need to verify the authenticity of what you're offering, he said. I passed over a thumb drive. Sample files. Enough to prove what I have, not enough to be useful on their own. They had an IT specialist in another room review the files. 20 minutes later, we had a deal. The money would be transferred to an offshore account within 24 hours. The server would be delivered to a specified location once payment was confirmed. The transaction itself was anticlimactic. A parking garage, an unmarked van, the suitcase exchanged for confirmation of the wire transfer. No words spoken. Very spy movie. Looking back on it. By that evening, I was $850,000 richer, and Pinnacle was completely, utterly vulnerable. They just didn't know it yet. The fallout began the next morning. Pinnacle's systems seemed normal at first. I had left the primary servers intact, after all. But then clients started receiving calls from Technova representatives who somehow knew exactly when their contracts with Pinnacle were up for renewal and could offer suspiciously similar services at better rates. Development teams found themselves working on projects that mysteriously resembled Pinnacle's unreleased products. Internal emails referenced information that should have been confidential. It took Pinnacle 3 days to realize their backup server was missing. By then, Technova had already copied everything and begun their strategic assault. I watched from afar as Robert sent increasingly desperate emails to the entire company about a security breach and potential data loss. The company-wide email he sent on day 5 was my favorite. "We are experiencing unprecedented challenges due to malicious activity. All hands on deck. Any information about server irregularities from the past week should be reported immediately." Translation: "We're drowning, and I have no idea how to fix this." By week 2, Pinnacle had lost 3 major clients. By month 1, their stock had plummeted 68%. By month 3, they were laying people off, including Derek, my so-called replacement. Turns out, managing servers is difficult when you have no idea what's on them or how they were configured. Robert tried calling me daily for weeks. I never answered. Eventually, his desperate voicemails turned to legal threats. But he had a problem. Proving it was me would mean admitting to shareholders that he had demoted the person responsible for their most sensitive systems and then failed to revoke her access. Corporate negligence at its finest. Meanwhile, Technova was thriving. They released a new product line that was essentially Pinnacle's unreleased flagship offering, but better. They targeted and acquired Pinnacle's most valuable clients. They even hired several key Pinnacle employees who jumped ship once they saw the writing on the wall. 6 months later, as agreed, they brought me on as a security consultant. My job? To protect their systems from people like, well, me. The perfect revenge isn't just about hurting someone who hurt you. It's about turning their greatest mistake into your greatest advantage. Robert called me dead weight, so I showed him exactly what happens when that weight is suddenly removed and then used against him. Pinnacle filed for bankruptcy 8 months after I walked out with their server. Robert resigned in disgrace. And me? I was now earning triple my old salary, respected for exactly the knowledge and experience that had been dismissed as obsolete. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just about getting even, it's about getting ahead. But this story doesn't end there. The third part, the unexpected aftermath, would bring consequences none of us could have predicted. Because corporate espionage, no matter how justified it feels, comes with a price. And I was about to discover exactly how high that price could be. 3 months into my new consulting position at Technova, I was living what seemed like the perfect revenge fantasy. I had money, respect, and the satisfaction of watching Pinnacle's complete collapse from a safe distance. Robert had resigned in disgrace. Derek, my replacement, was reportedly working at a mall kiosk selling phone cases, and I had successfully transformed from undervalued employee to highly paid expert. But revenge has a way of taking unexpected turns. It started with a LinkedIn message from Amy, my former colleague from Pinnacle's security team. "Need to talk. Not what you think. Urgent." I almost ignored it. What could she possibly have to say that I wanted to hear? But curiosity won out. We met at a quiet cafe, far from both Pinnacle and Technova offices. Amy looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back messily. The collapse of Pinnacle had clearly taken its toll. "I know what you did," she said, without preamble once we were seated. "I don't blame you, but there's something you need to know." My heart raced, but I kept my expression neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. She gave me a look that said she wasn't buying it. Jenny, I was head of security. You think I couldn't piece together who took the server? But that's not why I'm here. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of emails I'd never seen before. These were in Robert's private account. He had a secondary email system for his less ethical communications. When the company went into receivership, I was tasked with securing all digital assets. I found these. I scanned the emails, my blood running cold. They were exchanges between Robert and investors dating back 2 years, discussing plans to essentially gut Pinnacle's most valuable assets and rebuild under a new corporate entity without most of the original team. My name appeared repeatedly as someone who needed to be managed out because I knew too much about the core systems. They were planning to push you out regardless, Ami said quietly. The whole thing with Derek was just the beginning. If you hadn't taken the server, they would have found another way to force you out within months. I felt sick. Not because I regretted what I'd done, but because the betrayal ran even deeper than I'd realized. It hadn't been a sudden decision to replace Mate, had been a calculated plan spanning years. There's more, Amy continued. The FBI is investigating the collapse of Pinnacle. They're looking at potential securities fraud by Robert and the board. But they're also investigating the server theft. They've been interviewing everyone. Have they talked to you? I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. She nodded. Last week. I didn't tell them anything about you. But Jenny, they're good at their jobs. It's only a matter of time. I thanked her for the warning and left, my mind racing. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fantasy of my perfect revenge was crumbling, revealing the complex reality underneath. Yes, I'd gotten back at Robert and the company that had discarded May, but at what cost? Nearly 200 people had lost their jobs, many of them innocent colleagues who had never done me any harm. And now federal investigators were circling. The next morning, I received a text from an unknown number. Miss Chen, this is Special Agent Davis with the FBI. We'd like to speak with you regarding Pinnacle Tech Solutions. Please call to arrange a meeting. My stomach dropped. This was the consequence I'd tried not to think about. Corporate espionage is a federal crime, punishable by up to 10 years in prison and fines of millions of dollars. No amount of satisfaction from watching Robert's downfall was worth a decade behind bars. I called my lawyer immediately. Her advice was clear. Say nothing without legal representation. Nothing. The meeting with the FBI was set for the following day at their field office. I spent the night before going through every possible scenario in my head. Would they arrest me on the spot? Had they already raided my storage unit and found evidence? Did they have surveillance footage from the server room? How much had Technova revealed under pressure? My lawyer and I arrived exactly on time. Special Agents Davis and Morales led us to a sterile interview room exactly like the ones you see on television, right down to the uncomfortable chairs and the mirrored wall that was obviously a two-way observation window. Miss Chen, Agent Davis began. We're investigating the collapse of Pinnacle Tech Solutions and related potential crimes, including securities fraud, corporate espionage, and theft of trade secrets. I said nothing, following my lawyer's instructions. We know about the server, Agent Morales added. We know it was taken approximately 3 months ago and that the contents were sold to a competitor. What we're trying to determine is who was involved and at what levels. My lawyer interjected. My client is here voluntarily to assist in your investigation, but she is not making any statements at this time. Agent Davis smiled thinly. Miss Chen, We've been investigating Pinnacle for some time since before the server incident. We have evidence suggesting widespread securities fraud by the executive team. They were systematically misleading investors while planning to strip the company's assets. This aligned with what Ami had shown me, but I remained silent. We also have evidence, Agent Morales continued, that certain employees were targeted for removal because they posed risks to this plan. Employees with too much institutional knowledge or technical access. They laid photographs on the table surveillance stills from the morning I had taken the server. There I was, rolling my suitcase out of the building at 6:23 a.m. We know what happened to the server, Agent Davis said. What we're offering you is an opportunity. My lawyer leaned forward. What kind of opportunity? Immunity from prosecution, in exchange for testimony against both Pinnacle's executives and Teknova's leadership regarding their acquisition and use of stolen proprietary information. The agents explained their theory. Robert and Pinnacle's board had been defrauding investors for years. When I took the server and sold it to Teknova, I had unwittingly exposed their scheme. Now the FBI needed my testimony to build cases against both companies. My lawyer asked for a moment alone with me. Once the agents left, she was blunt. This is the best outcome you could hope for. Without immunity, you're looking at significant prison time. I thought about my options. Refuse and almost certainly go to prison. Accept and betray Teknova, becoming a corporate Judas twice over. Neither choice felt good. When the agents returned, I agreed to their deal. Over the next 6 months, I worked with the FBI, providing detailed testimony about both the server theft and everything I knew about Pinnacle's operations. I wore a wire to meetings at Teknova, gathering evidence of how they had knowingly purchased stolen data. The cases never went to trial. Both companies settled, paying massive fines. Several executives, including Robert and Vincent from Teknova, faced criminal charges resulting in plea deals with no prison time, but substantial personal fines and professional disbarment. And me? I received full immunity, but lost everything else. My consulting position at Teknova disappeared. My professional reputation was in tatters now. I was known throughout the industry as both a thief and an informant. The money from selling the server was seized as evidence, though ultimately I was allowed to keep it as part of my immunity deal. But here's the twist I never saw coming. 6 months after the investigation concluded, I received an email from a startup in Seattle, specializing in cybersecurity. The founder had followed the Pinnacle case closely and was impressed not by my theft, but by how thoroughly I understood the systems I had helped build and ultimately exploit. We need someone who understands security from both sides, the email read. Someone who knows how to build systems and how they can be compromised. Someone with your unique perspective. The job offer came with a catch. I would need to speak publicly about my experience, to serve as a cautionary tale for other companies about both the importance of ethical leadership and proper security protocols. My mistake would become my message. I accepted. Today, 3 years later, I'm the chief security officer at that same company. I travel around the country giving talks with titles like From Revenge to Redemption and Both Sides of the Server Cabinet. Lessons from a corporate espionage case. Companies hire me to test their security by attempting to social engineer my way into their most sensitive systems, which I can usually do in under 48 hours. The irony isn't lost on me. Being called dead weight nearly destroyed my life and then ultimately led to the career I was always meant to have. My greatest mistake became my greatest lesson and eventually my greatest asset. Robert now works at a small regional IT company, never again to hold an executive position. Derek, my replacement, actually reached out to apologize. He had no idea about the larger plan to push me out. He now works for one of my clients and is developing into a decent server architect with proper mentoring this time. As for me, I've learned that revenge might feel sweet in the moment, but its aftertaste is complex and lasting. If I could go back, would I take that server again? Honestly, I don't know. The price was nearly too high. But I do know that sometimes being underestimated, being called dead weight, gives you a unique kind of power. Just make sure you understand the consequences before you decide to use it. That's my story. From loyal employee to corporate saboteur to federal informant to security expert. All because someone didn't recognize my value until it was gone.